Hello, and I'm back in action. I have navigated my way past the Great Ocean Road sign at Eastern View. I have parked my car just at Cinema Point, which is about a kilometre past the Eastern View sign. And I've made my way around the corner, about 10 minutes around the corner on rock, so not for the faint-hearted at low tide, because it's not accessible at high tide. And where we are now is the campgrounds, one of the campgrounds of when the Great Ocean Road was built in 1918 to 1922. Builders were in this area about 1920 in particular. If you can just see the houses up on the hill behind me, Aluka, which is Luca's just up here, just up there, the one to the right of the image. That was the original estate of this region, which is called Big Hill. Aluka burnt down twice and was rebuilt. I don't imagine it's anything like what it was when it was originally built in the early 1920s. I've skipped ahead a bit though, as I just make my way across the final rocks to the campsites. Let me explain. When Australian servicemen returned from the First World War, after very trying conditions in Europe, partly as a result of some poor planning by the British military, which sent Australians into horrible situations, lots of traumatised soldiers returned to Australia, and it was decided by people in the government that they should use the soldiers to build roads extending into previously not uncharted but isolated territories in all parts of Victoria. And one of the main locations where this building took place was the building of the Great Ocean Road along the surf coast of Victoria, Victoria's western surf coast, from Anglesea to Apollo Bay, roughly, today. This was significant for a number of reasons. One, it charted the coast. It helped us build roads between townships. Lawn existed, but it was very difficult to access. There was other communities along this coast as well, but there was no road joining them. It was just bashing through the bush. I just saw something interesting, but I don't know what it is. Best left unshone. It was bloody. And it's a very interesting area. In fact, a friend of mine, Ashley, who is a local in the Lorne region, I spend a lot of time in this particular section of the coast, especially in summer when the tides are nice and low and I can explore. He once took a metal detector to this whole campsite region, and you're starting to get a bit of a better sense of it now. So we've got the beach behind us. We're in an inlet between Lorne and Eastern View, an inlet between Lorne and Anglesea. It's a very uninhabited part of the coastline, and obviously because I'm from the area, I know it a little better than most, and do come down if you get a chance. Chances are all through winter it won't be accessible because of the high tides. But as we approach these campsites, my friend Ashley, who I bump into with a metal detector around here sometimes, he's scoured this area and has found a whole bunch of historical treasures. Old coins, old belt buckles, little metal pieces that had come off cases, as testimony to the campsite that was in this region as the Great Ocean Road was being built. Again, I explain this to you to draw on the history of the region, to talk about, well, I suppose in one sense, the indigenous populations that once thrived around here, but also to understand the different parts that make up any society. We'll spend a lot of time focusing once again on all the theorists I've already identified to you in the earlier part of the vignette, in the second and first vignette. We spent a lot of time thinking about Europeans. We spend a lot of time thinking about the cities as well. And what we don't spend a lot of time thinking about is where people have been, the things they've built, the accomplishments they've made, and how they came to be. The Great Ocean Road is now said to be the largest war memorial in the world, as it was progressively opened after about 1922 through to the 1940s, and built almost entirely from soldier labour. And they camped in this region while they were constructing the road. Extremely interesting historical site. Soldiers went to war. Now, we've got that week one reading by Ayn Rand, which I will be drawing your attention to throughout the semester. It's a bit of a left field reading, I think, but I shared it for a very particular reason. For the New Intellectual is the name of the reading. I'm just going to walk up this path because there's a little quarry as a remnant of when people were camped here. Just up and around this corner. Again, I enter snake country as I do, and this is a very uninhabited country, so no one ever comes into these little gaps, except me and the people that live here, which is only a handful. What was I saying? Oh yes, I was talking about Ayn Rand. So Ayn Rand talked about the dangers of a society without intellectuals, the dangers of a society without thinkers, people who are thinking and whose job it is to think and to use reason and thought to navigate this world. We're left to the mercies, she argues, of people who are strong, military types, warlords, and people who preach spirituality, the witch doctors. For those that have read the reading will know exactly what I'm talking about. What do I think about that reading? I think it's a bit oversimplified. War is a funny thing. War was with us for the entire 20th century, and war in that form was highly formative of the lives of the people we study in this unit in a whole variety of ways. In week 2, we look at Sigmund Freud and Erich Fromm, are the set readings for the unit. Erich Fromm in particular fled. He was part of the Frankfurt School, loosely, and he fled the rise of the Third Reich, as did many academics of the time. Adorno and Horkheimer moved to Santa Monica. Fromm would join them a little bit later, as would I don't think Fromm ever went to Santa Monica. Marcuse would join them later on. But Fromm certainly had to flee Germany and Austria and write in exile. And Fromm ended up writing some very interesting things about the Third Reich, and we have a reading set from it from Fear of Freedom, I think. There's 2 books from Fromm that are related to this issue of the nature of government and freedom and the willingness of people to surrender their rights. One was Fear of Freedom, the other one was The Sane Society. From memory, standing here right now, I think I said a reading from Fear of Freedom. But, we had soldiers come back from the war, First World War, and they frankly had nothing to do. And they didn't want a bunch of people sitting around on the streets of Melbourne, especially at the time of the late, just as the war ended, with nothing to do with PTSD. My grandma once told me how my great-grandfather, who'd fought in World War I, came back with what she called shell shock, which is what we know in the 21st century to be PTSD. And he got a job guarding a highly secured facility. And my grandma laughed about it. She said the joke was on them. He couldn't have pulled the trigger of the gun they gave him if he'd wanted to. And there was also the little matter of the police strike in Melbourne in 1921. And in fact, Sir John Monash, who our university is named after, was a key figure in settling people after the general police strike in Melbourne during the early 1920s. It was said at the time in historical documents that if John Monash wanted to take control of the country at the time, he could have. He would have been dictator and prime minister and military leader. He didn't want to, of course. He wanted democracy to thrive. So there's interesting overlap, I think, with this particular site. And, we continue to go to war in some respects. Soldiers continue to come back with PTSD. My younger sister is in the military. So these are everyday things. And we have to always remember, the mistakes we repeat, I suppose. We think history's in the past. Where did I share it? Did I share it in the... I've shared it somewhere in the unit. Somewhere in the unit I talk about how things haven't changed that much, perhaps. There was a time, in this era of Trump, when we want to call Trump a Nazi. But, people called Nixon a Nazi. People called Obama a Nazi and a communist. I hope it's a source of calm to realise that these things have happened and will happen again in a whole variety of... Oh, giant bug. Bugs are out today. It's really humid in the Otways. So this little barge area, I'm not certain. There's some properties just beyond that fence, and it's private property beyond this line. A design developer, a land developer in the 1920s and 30s bought a huge tract of land in this area. Almost all of it is my understanding, with the vision of building a township in this area of the Otways. It never occurred, but the sale of the land was to fund the ongoing road. So we had this funny situation where we had soldiers with nothing to do. We didn't want them being part of the police strike in Melbourne. They got jobs on the Gradiston Road. Several died during the building of the Gradiston Road. And this is where they lived for a good period of time in around 1919 and 1920. I've got one more stop for the coast section of these vignettes. I'll have one or two other vignettes beyond this, but I'm going to continue now around the corner another 10 or 15 minutes over rock. And again, this is very challenging rock. I'm a very experienced rock hopper in these regions, so I don't recommend, unless you're extremely fit and extremely good ankles, that can be sprained and somehow you don't get hurt, because that's what you'll need for this rock hopping section. Also, the tide will consume you if you try to do this in winter. But it's said to be a cave where William Buckley spent time. So in about 15-20 minutes when I get around there, probably puffed, the tide's nice and low and still going out. I'll check back in with you then.